A container ship seized in the Gulf, a ceasefire deadline that's closing in fast, and plenty of bargaining table brinkmanship between the U.S. and Iran. With the price of oil back on the rise, de-escalation would certainly offer relief to Donald Trump's constituents. So what's the plan of a U.S. president who's proved impulsive, at times threatening Iran with civilizational erasure, at others floating the idea of splitting the profits with Tehran on a Strait of Hormuz toll for tankers? How to bargain when your opponent enjoys home field advantage and knows you do not want to put boots on the ground. Contrary to the mantra that went viral last year, Trump does not always chicken out. He certainly proved it on February 28th, when he started the war and took out Iran's supreme leader. He doesn't always chicken out, but also he doesn't always seem to have a plan, say his critics. We'll ask about erratic messaging, fresh reports of impulse decision-making inside the White House, and an apparent disregard for winning hearts and minds. Case in point, allowing Israel to continue a Gaza-style bulldozing of towns in southern Lebanon that flies in the face of Trump's objective of pushing normalization on Israel's northern border and a broader deal with Hezbollah's patron, Iran. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, what exit strategy is it? With us from Boston, Arash Azizi, who is a contributing writer at The Atlantic, historian, and your books include What Iranians Want, Women, Life, and Freedom. Thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
It's great to be with you.
We usually see him from a video link in Washington. Douglas Hay, former communications director for the Republican National Committee. Welcome to Paris.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Rina Bassiste, correspondent for the news site Al Monitor. How are you?
Good evening, François. Nice to be here.
On the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. So, round two must be happening, right? After all, why else would the U.S. president, vice president, be expected back in Pakistan's capital for negotiations, the follow-up talks to those that secured that two-week truce that expires on Wednesday? Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi meeting earlier with the acting U.S. ambassador, Deputy Chief of Mission Natalie Baker. This despite the Iranian Foreign Ministry's insistence that it hadn't yet decided whether or not it would show. Arash Azizi, we've had confusing messaging this Monday from, first there was a report in the New York Post that J.D. Vance was already wheels up and on his way. Then it was stated that he hadn't yet left. How do those talks look to you?
I think they will happen on Wednesday. They're likely that they'll take place by Wednesday. There has been some confusion as to whether they'll take place. Iran has said they won't go, but my assessment right now, as I'm speaking to you, is that they'll happen this week. The blockade has been successful in this way. This brought Iran to the table, and there's enough people in Iran who want to make the deal that they'll go ahead with it. But of course, it could also change again by the time Wednesday comes. But at the moment, I think they'll meet by Wednesday.
You seem pretty confident. Tell us why.
I mean, just my reading of the latest sort of signals coming from Iran, and knowing that there's a very significant part of the regime who was leading the talks, who is interested in getting a deal, and that there is enough agreement on the other side of the United States that they will play ball enough with Iran to at least show up to the table again. And they've already, of course, have dispatched delegations there. So this is what it's not 80%, 90% confidence rate, about 50%. I think the talks will happen on Wednesday.
All right, 50%. That's the prediction there from Arash Azizi. J.D. Vance to be joined by the special envoy Steve Witkoff, by the U.S. president's son-in-law Jared Kushner, the pair that was present in Geneva to negotiate just before the war started. Not mentioned by name by the Iranian Foreign Ministry in its daily briefing this Monday, but it's clear that Tehran does not rate the pair.
We truly do not see any serious signs of resolve on the part of the United States. On the contrary, there are repeated and numerous indications that no seriousness exists in the US when it comes to advancing diplomacy in its real conventional sense, rather than diplomacy that means issuing dictates.
No seriousness when it comes to advancing diplomacy in its real conventional sense. Does he have a point? You put a real estate mogul in charge of negotiating with Ukraine, with Iran.
Trump always looks at everything as a real estate deal. How can I close that deal? But what we've seen is he doesn't often act in that regard in ways that we'd expect. And whether he's there or it's J.D. Vance or somebody else, the fact that this administration has backed itself into the corner it's in also makes it harder. And I've talked to a lot of congressional Republicans over the past few weeks who are really struggling with how to talk about this. They want to be supportive of the president. But just as we all have seen, we don't know what the plan is. We don't know what the objectives are, what the exit strategy is, how they define victory. And what we've seen from the president, I think this is one of the challenges that he really has, is every day we hear him say, this is going to be over in 24 to 48 hours. But we've heard that for 2 months now. And so he's really struggling with voters. A lot of the people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 but voted for Donald Trump in 2024, people he won back over, who are scratching their heads and saying, what are we doing? Why are we there? And how do we get out? And they're all paying more at the pump as well.
Okay, but things have evolved since February the 28th. Those that want to give Donald Trump a long leash are saying that they see the focus being more about the enriched uranium than anything else, less about regime change these days. They're also seeing that we are seeing in the mix the U.S. Secretary of State, the conventional diplomacy the Iranians are demanding there, brokering between the Israelis and the Lebanese. The fact that it's the U.S. Vice President now who's heading these talks, does that change anything, or is it still the same sort of fuzzy messaging?
Yeah, well, the reality in Washington is whether you're a fan of his or not, it is Donald Trump's world, and we're all living in it. And so ultimately, the person who's going to say yes or no is going to be President Trump, whether that's negotiated by his son-in-law, not typical diplomacy, obviously, or J.D. Vance or Steve Witkoff or Marco Rubio, whomever. It's ultimately up to Donald Trump to find a deal that he finds acceptable. We just don't know what that is yet.
Rina Bassiste, again, J.D. Vance, flanked by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. How does that seem?
Well, it seems if you wanted to have a situation that is as far as possible from the Obama period negotiations for the JCPOA, then he's there. I mean, we are in a completely different setup. First of all, by the people negotiating, as you well explained. The team is very small, and in this team, even we saw it, the people that arrived to Islamabad 1, if you want, you didn't really have any experts in nuclear, any people that could negotiate the deal if really the issue is the nuclear program and not the Strait of Hormuz, then you would need people who know exactly, you have to have some details about the different sites. You have to know how control will be implemented, because we will arrive to this point where an agreement would say we would leave the Iranians with some sort of a capacity of uranium enrichment, which means that you have to control what they're doing, and you have to control how they take off the debris from the sites that were destroyed. All of that. This is not at all the direction that the negotiating team is going, and we have this impression, and you said, well, we are not sure about his plan, about his objectives, but we have an impression that they are probably more going towards a sort of a general agreement, something maybe like the agreement that was negotiated between Israel and Hamas, a few points, 15 points, 20 points, nothing more complicated than that. It's not at all the JCPOA that took almost 2 years to negotiate and was as thick as that.
This was an agreement signed in 2015, and it was a different time because you had all the permanent members of the UN Security Council who signed on to this agreement. So did
exactly.
the UN.
And we didn't have war, we didn't have an urgency, and we didn't have a president that maybe doesn't know, we don't know. Maybe he didn't decide himself what the objectives are. So if we are very, very optimistic, we might say that hopefully they will discuss a very lean sort of framework agreement that would lead to further negotiations along the way, because negotiating like that, coming first to Islamabad, two people, I mean, J.D. Vance, he never negotiated such a big agreement in his life, even though he is the vice president, and he was facing somebody who has been negotiating a lot, and is, the Iranians, they are the masters of negotiations, so in a way it was not at all balanced, and now we don't know. We don't know exactly if they are really coming, Mr. Witkoff and his coach, who are they going to meet on the other side?
Yeah, who are they going to meet on the other side? Arash Azizi, if it's the Speaker of Parliament, if it's the Foreign Minister, are they speaking in the name of those who are actually in charge these days?
Short answer is yes. There is infighting in Tehran. The hardliners have shown some resistance to Iran, possibly giving too much. That happened over the weekend, and it was remarkable. And at some point, you really had media outlets aligned with the Revolutionary Guards effectively publishing statements against Talibov, against Araghchi, who had tweeted Iran foreign minister, and against the National Security Council. So there is infighting, but National Security Council very much stays in charge, and Araghchi, as a foreign minister, is a member of that. Talibov, who's the Speaker of the Parliament, is a member of that, is the most dominant member of that. So they're not speaking out of nowhere. They do represent Iran, but there's a limit to the concessions they can give, and there is a possibility of infighting. The nightmare scenario for them would be if they agree to something, but let's say the different sections of the Revolutionary Guards who do act in this decentralized manner won't go ahead with it and would do their own thing. But there's nothing so far that shows this nightmare scenario might be on. What is more likely is that they'll just be under pressure, and under pressure they'll do something. But once they do it, and once they sign on the dotted line, and they have agreement from Iran and its structures, it would be, it would be good as their word.
Okay, so as Rina Bassist was saying, the newbies on the American side, no match when it comes to negotiating nuclear deals with the Iranians who've been at it for decades now. But then the Americans, well, they've got firepower. If the price of crude started the week up sharply, somewhere between 4% and 6% up, it's because traders are worried about the facts on the ground, or should we say the facts at sea. With the waters that here you see, this is from earlier in the day, staring out at the Strait of Hormuz from the coast of Oman, calm this Monday, but it was shots fired by the U.S. Navy and the weekend seizing of the Tuska, an Iranian cargo ship that tried to sail through the open seas that gave those traders the jitters. The U.S. military has directed 27 vessels to turn around and return to an Iranian port since the beginning of the blockade around the Strait of Hormuz, according to the U.S. Central Command. Now, Arash Azizi, these kind of literally shots across the bow, is that something that concerns the Revolutionary Guards, or they say, hey, they're speaking our language?
Well, the blockade and U.S.'s military presence is what has compelled Iran to come to the table. So, it's all part of the equation. War and diplomacy here cannot be separated. They've always been interwoven. And in terms of U.S. being outmatched at the negotiating table, look, it's true to a good degree. These guys are very experienced. They're much more experienced politicians. Araghchi was already a chief negotiator for Iran more than 10 years ago, leading the JCPOA. Araghchi was one of the chief negotiators as deputy foreign minister. So, he knows this better. But, it can't be overplayed either. As with any other job, newbies sometimes also stand their ground and do impressive things. So, this is the first rodeo in some ways, first diplomatic rodeo, certainly for Vice President Vance. But he also comes, with a lot of, he's a talented guy, and he clearly is a politically ambitious guy, and he wants to get something out of this. So, that doesn't, it's not sort of just because the Iranian side is more experienced doesn't mean the negotiations are going to be doomed, or that it's going to be terrible for the U.S., or that they're going to just run circle around them.
It's never been done before, so maybe it'll work, let's say.
It's a new way of looking at things. And I think the challenge for the Trump administration here, the mistake that they made, is Venezuela went really well, went very quickly, and Trump obviously thought that he could just do the same thing in Iran that comes with so many more pressure points and obstacles that this puts us exactly where we are. And if you talk to Republicans in Washington right now, across the street from the White House at the Blair House, Susie Wiles is leading a meeting with folks like myself, Republican campaign veterans, spokespeople, and so forth, because they don't know how to talk about this as well. And it comes with the elections getting closer and closer, and Trump knowing this is not what he ran on. And in fact, what he ran on was lowering prices. So what he's doing is going counter to what he promised, and it's creating the real political pressure for him.
Why did he do this?
I think he thought that he could. No, Donald Trump really believes in himself. That seems pretty obvious. And because Venezuela went so well, because our military is so skilled at how it proceeds in measures like these, he thought this would be simple. I can't explain why other than his real true belief in himself, because no other president would think this is a simple operation.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal this weekend painted a picture of a commander-in-chief, prone to outbursts, like when those two U.S. pilots went down over Iran over Easter weekend, and staff that are learning to navigate an impulsive leader. The paper reporting that aides kept the president out of the room as they got minute-by-minute updates because they believed his impatience wouldn't be helpful. Are we back to Trump 1, where he says something and then maybe they afterwards try to ride out the storm and help things glaze over?
I don't think that's ever changed. The real change between this current administration and the previous one is, to some extent, they understand the levers of government in ways that they didn't before. Trump 1.0 wouldn't have done these measures. He certainly feels emboldened and empowered to do so. But also, we're not talking about another American name that is the most prominent outside of Trump's name in this whole debate, and that's Pope Leo. And the influence that he is having, without criticizing Donald Trump by name, has shifted this debate within Washington, D.C., within the country. And it has a lot of Catholic voters asking the same questions that the Pope is, whether they voted for Trump or not. It's a really new political dynamic that we've just never seen before.
Let's talk about religion for a second. That Wall Street Journal article points to erratic messaging, like threatening civilizational erasure, or that April 11th rant against the Islamic Republic that included the line, "Praise be to Allah." The Wall Street Journal reports that when one of the advisors later asked him about this, the president replied that the idea of Allah came from himself. According to senior administration officials, Trump wanted to give the impression of being as unstable and aggressive as possible, believing this would force the Iranians to come to the negotiating table. Rina Bassist, it's what U.S. President, a former one, Richard Nixon, called the madman theory of negotiating.
Yeah, only here the problem is, before we are talking about what it's doing to the Iranians, let's talk about what it's doing to his own staff, and first of all to all his military advisors. And we have seen that very, very clearly, because the beginning of the operation, the joint operation with the Israelis, was rather well organized. I mean, we had this very successful first hit on Khamenei and his staff, and then the Israelis and the Americans divided geographically Iran, each one with its own targets. It was going well. And then at some point, all of these declarations and counter-declarations by President Trump, it seems that it completely destabilized his military advisors, or the people that are supposed to draw the lines of the strategy. Because if you say that you are going to annihilate complete civilization, what does it mean? Which weapons are you intending to use? I mean, the tool of the Strait of Hormuz, of the Strait of Hormuz, the blocking of the Hormuz, that's a very, very powerful weapon, which were until yesterday was only dissuasive. It was not an aggressive one. I mean, the commanders of the American boats were just talking in the microphone and warning the other boats not to come. So this is a tool they could have used much, much earlier in the war without causing any casualties, with a big effect, because it is very effective when you block the Iranian boats with all the petrol and everything, and they didn't use it. So at some point, I think 2 or 3 weeks into this war, a lot of us started questioning not only where Trump is going, but is he even letting his military strategists express themselves and explain to him the possibilities? It doesn't seem so.
Arish Azizi, you heard Douglas Hay there talking about religion seeping into the conversation with the Pope pushing back against criticism. What did you think when you saw that Trump tweet about praise be to Allah?
I mean, you know, it's sort of a classic President Trump using unexpected language and, you know, showing he gets angry and apparently gets his own phone and types out whatever. So, I mean, I didn't read on too much into it. It shows that he's the kind of, you know, impulsive was the word that was used, but he's also the kind of someone who's very unconventional. Obviously, it was a very disturbing tweet, threatening Iran with civilizational destruction, potentially threatening the use of nuclear bomb. And frankly, it's an uncomfortable thing that the leader of the free world operates in this way. Even though it sometimes might get results, it's an uncomfortable thing that the policy process is gone and this is what we have instead. You know, I live here in the United States and we've been used to President Trump's for many years, not almost a decade in and out of power. So he's part of the political fixture here. I do hope that his departure from norms is not permanent and that the next president would return to the policy process. But it might also be that some of the innovations he's made are here to stay.
There's certainly a lot of volatility involved here, and a kind of a clash of civilizations vibe to the Iran war and its spillover in Lebanon. Lebanon, where Israel has now apologized for one of its soldiers smashing a statue of Christ. This was on the cross in the village of Debel, that's in the south, over the weekend. Biblical references which have become the new normal in Washington, particularly at the Pentagon, whose boss last Thursday likened the press to Christ haters.
I sat there in church and I thought, our press are just like these Pharisees. Not all of you, but the legacy Trump-hating press. Your politically motivated animus for President Trump nearly completely blinds you from the brilliance of our American warriors. The Pharisees scrutinized every good act in order to find a violation, only looking for the negative.
Okay, biblical references, talking about warriors, not talking about soldiers when it comes to the United States. Douglas Hay, this sort of clash of civilizations approach, how does that sit with, again, inside of Donald Trump's coalition? There's many people who are devout, who are religious.
Yes, and look, if you're invested in Donald Trump, you're invested all the way. And how many times over 10 years now have we said, is this where the base is going to break with Trump? And it's never happened, whether it's the Access Hollywood tape, you know, the sort of flashy things that we see, or real substantive policy issues. So it's not clear that that happens on this one as well. But what I worry about is, and I say this having I was in Israel last year when some of the bombing started back and forth. And we met with the ambassador, Mike Huckabee, very conservative Christian, had been to Israel over 100 times in his life. The symbiotic nature of Christian conservatism and support for Israel is so intermeshed, it's very difficult to pull that apart. That kind of imagery certainly could do so, and I would guarantee that that is being shared around in a lot of online forums and Christian conservative sites.
At what point is it kind of messianic, this sort of...
We're well past that point.
Yeah.
It's been messianic since day one almost.
Does that sound familiar, Rina Bassis, when you look at domestic Israeli politics?
Yes and no. Of course, inside Israeli politics, 100%. We have seen that for several years now, and especially since Netanyahu, since the last elections and this very far-right government of Mr. Netanyahu. But not so much, I would say, on the Iranian war. Why am I saying that? Because there was a lot of solidarity in Israel with the Iranian people when there were the demonstrations. And one could imagine that not all Iranians are atheists. Some of them are also Muslims, and nobody in Israel was bothered than that. There were very, very strong feelings, support for these people. So I would say the Jewish identity of the Israeli voters did not come in here. And I think that though most Israelis support Netanyahu in this war, and of course, all of the Israelis are against this dictatorship, oppressive regime in Tehran. The Israelis are against the vision of the regime in Tehran, which is very, very radical. But the Israelis, they are not against the Muslim Iranians, not at all. And this is maybe different than what we see in the case of Lebanon, where, of course, the identity, the Shiite identity of Hezbollah, this is playing a very big role.
Okay, but the clip we played of the U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, that kind of talk, how do Israelis see that?
I think for most Israelis, very uncomfortable, even though we have seen over the years quite a lot of that from Prime Minister Netanyahu himself. He likes quoting the Bible. Often when he ends a press conference, he's quoting some phrases, but maybe in a little bit of a more subtle manner than what we have seen now with the Pete Hegseth. Of course, there is an appeal for the religious parties, but the religious parties, at the end of the day, they are a minority in Israel. They are not the majority. So I would say most Israelis would not feel very comfortable with these religious references. In Israel, obviously, these are immediately identified with the far right.
Much has been made, Douglas Hay, about the split within Trump supporters over first the war in Gaza and now the war in Iran. How does that break down? Who are those who are splitting away from Donald Trump? Because it's not just one monolithic group, is it?
No, the Trump support has been throughout the party and bringing in new voters. I think it's one of the things that often gets overlooked. But the hardcore MAGA base also has a business component to it. And if you're a Tucker Carlson or you're a Steve Bannon, how you navigate these waters is based on your profit motive. And for Tucker Carlson, who's generally been against immigration, also against Israel, this is an opportunity for him. He's going to use this to make money. He'll have his split, but meanwhile, his son works for J.D. Vance. He'll be part of that broader conservative movement. And that ultimately doesn't go anywhere unless this continues to drag out. There was opposition to the strikes last year, but that operation was very quick, sort of forgotten about, and that opposition sort of went away. The longer this goes on, the more this becomes a vulnerability for Trump, especially because everybody's paying the same prices for gas and for groceries and everything else. So you can be a big Trump supporter, and you're still paying too much, and you know that things are too expensive, and that's not being fixed in the way that you were promised.
We had Arash Azizi on this panel a couple of weeks back, an Iranian panelist who said to us, well, the Trump administration is kind of talking the way the Islamic Republic speaks, with all this talk about their God being on the side of the righteous.
I mean, I think there's a shallow similarity, but I'm not sure, that extends. The Islamic Republic's ideology is based on a form of revolutionary, revisionist Islamism. I mean, by revisionist, I mean geopolitically revisionist. So it has very particular attributes. Whereas Donald Trump is not a serious Christian nationalist, even if he uses that language. And maybe Pete Hegseth is. By the way, I should say that PKK's attack on those in the media as Pharisees also had an anti-Semitic flavor to it, because Pharisees is obviously Jewish social movement in the Bible, and I think it was received as such here. But so the Christian nationalism is part of the parlance in U.S. right-wing politics, but I don't think it's quite comparable to the broader, elaborate Islamist ideology of the Islamic Republic in Iran. Yeah. But surely, religious language, and of course Netanyahu uses it in Israel as well, and in the far right in Israel is an important part of his government. It was a cornerstone of his government, and so religious extremism is part of governments in all the three countries, but not in quite the same way.
After the September 11th attacks of 2001, after the terror attacks here in Paris in 2013 and the such, there was people warning not to couch things in terms of clash of civilizations. Is that where we're at in 2026?
I don't think so. I don't think we are quite at the sort of clash of civilizations. I mean, that thesis obviously went back to Samuel Huntington, American political scientist. I don't think that's quite what we have, really. I think what we have much more than that is a multipolar world order in which various states go after their own interests. And there sometimes will be civilizational blocks, but in that way, Iran is actually sort of strategically alone. You have to remember, if you want to go by civilizational blocks, well, Iran has attacked more Muslim countries in this war than anything else. So I think you will have block of countries. The way Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan have come together surely has something to do with their identity as Sunni majority Muslim countries. But nevertheless, there'll be just one factor in the situation, and I don't think civilizational politics of the way Huntington talked about has quite played out fully. But look, there's also something to it. It was very fashionable to just dismiss Huntington as short-sighted and as irrelevant. But I think there's definitely something to it. But I think a state system and the rising multipolar world order is what we have here. And there will also be a form of transformation of Iranian statehood and Iranian geopolitical identity, because Iran would not be primarily just like a Muslim power or even a Shia Muslim power, although that's an important part of its identity, but then a strategically alone country in which it's in the sea of Sunnis and Arabs and Turks, and Iran is neither of these things, of course.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Arash Azizi, you have a nation, Iran, overthrows the Shah. The legitimacy of the Islamic Republic comes first from having this charismatic leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, who takes over. Then you have the war with Iraq, where it becomes a Sunni-Shia clash almost. Today, what role will religion play going forward inside of the regime?
I mean, the regime's identity right now, it's very much couched around a nationalistic form. I mean, they be it a religious nationalism, sure, but they've tried very much to play on the nationalist card and Iran's sovereignty, its defense of its soil, and they usually try to put it in this way. But it's very much still the Islamist revolutionary ideology, which is really not just like an Islamic identity, but it's an anti-Western. Primarily, is an ideology based on fighting the West and, of course, fighting Israel and flexing muscles there. That's still very much at the corner of the regime, at the cornerstone of the regime. But I think we'll see a transformation of that. I think in the nationalistic elements will increase, and we will have a world in which Iran is more like Saudi Arabia, more like Indonesia, more like Vietnam, a country that cares about its identity. It's a major country, obviously more than 90 million people, but not so much wedded to a very particular Islamist ideology. And that means also different policies that would center Iranian national interest as opposed to this revolutionary crusade against the United States and Israel.
Okay, so Rina Bassis, you hear Arash there saying, yeah, under the veneer of this religious talk, below it's nationalism, basically.
It's nationalism. Yes, I would agree with that. And there is something interesting here because the moment the Iranians decide to use this tool of the Strait of Hormuz as, to block it, to take the war to another level, what did they do? They shifted it from either a religious war, a civilization war, a nationalistic war, to the war of cars, the religion of cars. This is what we care now. I mean, for most people, and this was very well explained, the price of the petrol is much more important than your nationalistic feelings, your religious affiliation. I mean, it's how much you pay at the pump. That's where we come. But other than that, for the Iranians, I agree, it's nationalistic, but then there is also the economic side. I mean, the regime is trying to survive, is fighting for its survival, and for its survival, at some point, they will have to compromise because they have seen what the people are feeling, and the people, it's the price of petrol, but it's also what they pay in the shops. It's also the fact that they can't transfer money. They can't buy anything from the outside. So the situation of the people at the end is crucial. This is what is pushing at the end of the line the Iranians to negotiate, if indeed they will arrive to Islamabad too. So I would say, we take off the veneer of the civilization war. We take off the veneer of the war of religions. We take off even the veneer of the war of nationalism. At the end of the line, it's money.
It's about whether or not you can fill the tank. Douglas Hay, that's the perfect segue to asking, what is the exit strategy?
I genuinely don't think this administration knows yet. Again, President Trump went into this having a successful mission in Venezuela and presumably thought, we can just wrap all this up pretty quickly. We also know that Donald Trump likes to define victory sort of after the fact. He'll say whatever he did was victorious. That's why.
Can he walk away?
I don't think he can, but he's certainly trying to find ways to do that. He knows that this is hurting him politically with his base that doesn't love foreign wars, doesn't love foreign adventurism and so forth. They talk about warmongering in the past. They also don't like what they're paying. And again, the key promise that Donald Trump made when he ran for re-election in 2024 was, I'm going to bring down prices. And obviously that hasn't happened. The longer that continues, and it's not just what you pay at the pump, but what you pay at the pump and how that affects everything else. So baggage being checked at airlines, more expensive now. They've added fees. Plane fares, more expensive. Produce, things that are delivered on a truck, become more expensive. This becomes a real pressure point for the president moving forward.
Becomes a pressure point. Arash Azizi, is there an exit ramp? Can Donald Trump walk away from it? Can he take his ships home?
I think he can make a deal that would be acceptable to both sides, and that would be the best exit for him. But absence of that, sure he can. The Iranian regime has a limited ability to fight. It's very worried about an inconclusive end that would make it continue to be vulnerable to both economic crises at home. Basically, Iran says if we want to this war, it wants to get some sanctions relief or some deal out of it. But sure, if President Trump really wants to, he can probably walk away. And Iran will maybe do a couple of attacks. The U.S. will make a couple of threats. But it will end at some point.
So the Iranians, hold on, let me get this straight. What you just said, the Iranians don't want something that's inconclusive. So what's a deal that would be conclusive, that would be amenable to both sides? What would that involve?
It would involve Iran suspending its nuclear enrichment for some years without giving up the right to it entirely, shipping out HEU out of the country, accepting a regional deal that would put some limits on Iran's missile, and maybe in exchange for it being able to buy air defense, lifting of the sanctions on the Iran economy, freezing of the Iranian assets, and some sort of a non-belligerent agreement, and a regional deal that would involve Iran making some money off Hormuz Strait, basically, but that would also ward it off, protect Iran against claims of compensation by Arab countries in the future. This could be the contours of a broad deal that would be acceptable to both United States and Iran.
Rina Bassis, of course, there's three players in this. There's the U.S., Iran, and there's Israel. If there's a deal, does it automatically leave out Israel?
automatically is a big word, but yes, Israel would be the loser, probably, because we have spoken a lot about the president needing a deal. He's looking for a way out of it. So he's motivated to close an agreement quickly, as soon as possible. And if he closes a deal quickly, then of course he'll accept to compromise. And if he accepts to compromise, then we are very far away from the beginning of this joint U.S.-Israeli operation, where the president said there will be zero uranium enrichment. All the 400 kilos will be taken out of Iran. If he's going to opt for a deal now, then we won't see zero enrichment. We won't see all of the 400 kilos shipped to the U.S. I don't believe so. There will be a compromise in the long run, not in the short run, but in the long run, of course, would be dangerous.
And what if he says, Bibi, I can't give you that, but instead you can go sell to your voters, because I know you've got an election coming up, a normalization of ties with Lebanon?
Yes, well, that was the idea. I mean, that was a deal, spoken or unspoken. That's why Netanyahu had to accept the instructions from President Trump when he told him, you know, there is going to be a ceasefire and you have to accept it. So the deal is Netanyahu accept the ceasefire and perhaps negotiations with the Lebanese government. But then what Netanyahu wanted in exchange for accepting this ceasefire was exactly that the president would be harsher on the nuclear issue. And not only that, look at what we are negotiating. The idea was to negotiate the nuclear. Now we have also the Strait of Hormuz, which are no longer a precondition. They are part of the negotiations. So not only Israel is not going to get all that it wants on the nuclear, the whole issue of the ballistic missiles, gone. The whole issue of Iranian support, the money it's sending every year to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, that's also, it's gone. It's not on the negotiating table anymore.
Tweet in the last hour from the U.S. president over Truth Social. Quote, the deal that we are making with Iran will be, capital letters, far better than the JCPOA. At the end of the day, Douglas Hayes, is this about doing something better than his predecessor, Barack Obama?
That is 100% Donald Trump's motivation on everything. Everything that he does has to be bigger and better, not just than Obama, but Biden, Bush, Reagan. You can go on down the line. He's comparing himself to the best president in history, whether on a given day he says he's better than Washington or Lincoln. And so we talk a lot about America first. The reality is it's Donald Trump first. And whatever comes out of this is something that he's going to be able to claim is the biggest foreign success that the country's ever had, whether that's true or not.
And what will be the result of the midterm elections?
Republicans are going to lose the House. That's pretty much a done deal, just given what history tells us about elections and certainly the close margin that Republicans have, even though they're doing a tremendous job in out fundraising Democrats. But more and more, and the longer this all happens and goes on with costs, the Senate is increasingly in play.
Douglas Hayes, so many thanks for being with us here as well, stopping in while in Paris. I want to thank Rina Bassis, and I also want to thank Arash Azizi for being with us from Boston. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.